Hi, I'm Ted Price from Insomniac Games, and welcome to another episode of the Game Maker's Notebook. Today, it is my pleasure to talk with industry legend Ed Boon, famous for Mortal Kombat and the Injustice series. And we talk about a lot of subjects, including his incredible story about getting into the industry, how his voice is one of the most recognized in pop culture, and what he is up to now. And I would absolutely encourage you to listen because he's got great advice for people in the industry and people who would love to get into the industry.
Welcome to the Game Maker's Notebook, a podcast featuring a series of in-depth one-on-one conversations between game makers providing a thoughtful, intimate perspective on the business and craft of interactive entertainment. The Game Maker's Notebook is presented by the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences, a member-driven organization dedicated to the recognition and advancement of interactive entertainment.
It is my pleasure to be here with Ed Boon, who is a legend in the industry and has agreed to come on the program and talk about all types of things. So Ed, welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here and listen to the Todd Howard. I've listened to your previous ones, so I'm very excited to be here.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, let's take a step back. You and I grew up around the same time, and I'm really interested in finding out about the games you played before you got into the games industry, before you went to college.
Before I went to college was arcade games mainly, and I mean, depending on how far back you go, pinball machines even more specifically. I think I remember in kind of early grade school, I had started playing pinball machines at like a bowling alley, and I remember they wheeled in this game called Space Invaders, and I was kind of a little bit more skeptical. My younger brother, who's on our team right now, started playing it a lot, and I watched him. He got really good at it, and that really started my my love for video games. Space Invaders came out; it was wild, and Defender was a significant part of my my teenage years. Defender, Missile Command, Robotron, Joust. All of those, Asteroids, all of those classic arcade games were just fascinating to me. And then about the same time, the Apple computers and the Atari 800 was this, computer. And I was oddly more interested in how the games were made, or at least as much as how they were made than I was, how fun they were to play. I would look at Defender's explosion when your character would die and go, I wonder how they did that, so I started, programming in BASIC, learning that stuff, and then this mystery thing called assembly language, and how you can run much faster, and was putting things on the screen, and that I think a lot of programmers when they kind of have that aha moment of I can manipulate what's on the screen with this code, then that just opens the this kind of floodgates to what else can be done. So I started with arcade games, and then really gravitated towards computer games and the creation of them.
Well, I love the fact that you talk about assembly, right? Working, and were you using the Apple for that, or was that the Atari 800 that you?
It was the Atari 800.
Okay.
At the time, this is like there was a I don't call it a war, but there's Mac people and Windows people now. Right. Way back then, it was Apple II and Atari computers, and I was in the vast minority of people. Most people were Apple II.
Yeah, you definitely were. I had an Apple II, and I remember actually
6502 and all. Yeah.
I remember looking at the Atari 800 with envy and thinking, "Gosh, I kind of wish we had one of those." Yeah. But my dad got us an Apple II.
Well, and what's interesting was the Atari had sounds in it.
Right.
The Apple had little speakers in it, whatever, and the Atari. My understanding was that it was a more powerful computer, but the Apple was there first. That's where everybody who was a geek in programming went to. then the Atari came up, and then a few people went up, and I just happened to land in the Atari camp. And so I learned from that, while, the other 90% of the people I knew were Apple people.
So what's really cool, and I think most people don't realize, is that this is all before the internet. And, and so how did you teach yourself assembly?
I read magazines like Compute, and there's one called Analog, which was like, Atari something. It stood for something. I forgot what it was. And we would type in, a good friend of mine and I would, spend all night typing in a game. There's one line wrong where you forgot a semicolon and the game crashes, and just learning stuff like that. But it was just really just a hobby, enthusiastic, and it was such a cool thing to just start learning. And at the time there was also computer stores where you go and you see all the Apple games, and they're hanging on the wall in their plastic sleeves and stuff like that. And that was just a cool place to hang out and see other games that were being made.
I remember that. I remember getting my first programming book at an Apple store.
Yeah.
And it's it's so crazy to think back and realize how much has changed since then.
Yeah, those things just simply don't exist anymore.
Yeah.
All these avenues and ways of learning and stuff, just simply don't exist. It's a different world now.
But I think also it does show that back then you really had to want to learn how to program, and you really had to have that desire to build games.
Yeah.
And so when you were programming prior to college, were you prototyping games? Was there anything that you remember that was pretty cool?
Oh yeah. I remember making this completely rudimentary game, bomber game. A plane would fly, and you'd press a button, and then a bomb would drop, and you'd have to hit a building, and a certain amount of planes would by. I don't think I ever like finished a game. Okay, it's all done. I could ship this, and I never had the necessary audacity to say I could make a game that's better and this one on the shelf. Some people, like a friend of mine, Mark Trammell, he made a game, when he was 17 years old. He made Sneakers, this game, and I could do it. I can go to publish it. I can, I never had that kind of audacity. I was always a little bit more, passive, and so I do these games by myself, and then when I'm done with it, save the disc and move on to the next thing, as opposed to being bold enough to think, somebody's going to want to buy this or something like that. So,
well, when you went to college, you went to University of Illinois.
Yeah.
Did you at the time think about a career in games?
I thought it would be a dream thing to do, and again, I had by the time I was gotten to college, I had knew who Eugene Jarvis was, who Larry DeMar was, these guys who Ed Log, who did Asteroids and all that stuff. And it was like, wow, that would be the coolest job in the world, but likely I'll end up doing, programming for a bank or something like that. I knew I liked computer software and writing software and stuff like that, but I always thought it would be a cool thing that I would continue as a hobby, in a basement or something like that, just messing around. So I hadn't reached that dream yet. So.
And so for you, what was the tipping point? What actually got you into the industry?
Luck. When I graduated, I made a resume. And what's interesting is I've made one resume my entire life. I've only had one job outside of school my entire life. And so it's really odd. And I still have it. And I had and it said, Pascal experience, Fortran, it was, I don't even think C was in the, in the vernacular at the time, some of the language experience, blah, blah, blah. And I had a little asterisk at the bottom that said interest in video games, as a hobby or something. And a headhunter saw it, and he sent it to Williams Electronics, who was looking for pinball programmers. And I was as unqualified as any person could be. And it didn't even say interest in pinball. It said interest in video games. So for some reason, it got to the head of software at Williams Electronics. And this headhunter calls me up and he says, do you want to go work at Williams Electronics? And I heard of Williams Electronics and I thought of Defender and Joust and Robotron. And it was like, this is the greatest thing in the world. And I said, of course I would. And I went there thinking I was gonna interview for a video game programmer, but it was for a pinball programmer.
Okay.
That as I learned there. As I got there, I'm sitting there and I'm talking to this guy who was the main programmer on Joust, and which was like one of my favorite games. And he was programming pinballs now, and then he was saying, something pinball. I go pinball, and he goes, yeah, this is for a pinball programmer. And I remember saying to him, do people program pinball machines? Like I actually like.
Well, that's a great question because it's really easy to assume that there isn't any programming involved.
Exactly. It's not as like obvious, and especially at the time, they're way more sophisticated now. But I remember saying, do people program pinball machines? He's like, oh yeah. And I knew of some pinball machines, and he would, he said, are you still interested? I said, yeah, absolutely. And in my head, I was thinking, okay, that'll be my foot in the door to go eventually do video games. And he was a guy who did Joust, and then he said, what games do you like? And I go, oh, I like Defender, I like Joust. And he goes, yeah, I program Joust. I remember saying to him, get out of here. Like a little, I'm 21 years old or something like that. And it's like, get out of here. And he goes, no, I did. I really did. And then I was kind of like, what? Like I got nervous and was kind of, concerned that I had insulted him and everything. And, but walking around this building was, hey, there's a guy who did Defender. There's a guy who did Joust. These games that I was, obsessed with, and it was just like this really surreal, weird thing. It's like going to, the Warner Brothers lot and seeing, all these movie stars walk into it. That was my equivalent to me. It was just oh my God, this place filled with all these guys who made the games that I loved. It was amazing.
That is, that would be incredible. I'd love to be able to go back and see that moment.
God. That was like, it was magic just because also, at the time, a person or couple of people were associated with a game. Two people can make a game.
Yeah.
Robotron was made by two guys, Eugene Jarvis and Larry DeMar. So you can really tie, now games are made by 200 people, 500 people, but at the time there was a real association in my head with, that guy made Asteroids, that guy made, this game. And that was like truly amazing for somebody who was really into that stuff.
Well, and Williams was sort of the king at that point. I mean, they had all the best games.
They were on a real roll for a while there with, Defender, Stargate, Robotron, Joust, Sinistar. They had a string of games that was just happened to be in my, teenage, kind of formative, those were the games I think there were, plus, Missile Command, Asteroids, that were easily, 90% of my, interest and discovery of video games.
So jumping ahead a couple years, what inspired you to propose Mortal Kombat?
Oh, wow.
And I'm assuming it was a couple years. I mean, it was
a few years. I programmed pinball machines for 3 years. And then downstairs was the video game department. And I made friends with all of them. And I had actually worked on a pinball machine with Eugene Jarvis. So Eugene and I were really good friends at the time. He was starting a game, a new hardware that had just incredible blitting power. Just could blow out so many pixels. It's a game called Narc. And I was down there all the time, and I got the book for the processor, the 34010 processor, and I was learning the instructions. We were doing games in assembly at the time, and again, Eugene and I were really close, and they were working on a game. I convinced them to let me bring a video development system into my office where I was doing pinball, and I would do that at night, and mess around with that. And at the time, they wanted to start multiple games after Narc. So I worked on a football game with this guy named John Newcomer, who was the other guy behind Joust, So did that. It did well. We did a sequel to that did well. And then it was like, okay, now what are we going to do? So a guy named John Tobias had worked on a game called Smash TV. He had just finished up that sequel. I finished up my sequel. We started a conversation, and that conversation was, wouldn't it be cool to make gigantic characters with our digitized hardware? All the games we were doing, the characters were this big on the screen.
Yeah.
And we said, we would always say, if they took up half the screen, wouldn't look how real that would look, And Street Fighter 2, it was just beginning to really like take off, and become like this phenomenon. And we said, what if we did, this really, really like MTV bad boy, bloody version of Street Fighter. That was this one conversation we had. I remember it was like, at night everybody was crunching, and we were just one of those conversations that starts it. And that was kind of like the that kind of birth of that moment of Mortal Kombat. Two guys talking. One was a programmer, one was an artist. Back then, there was no such thing as a game designer. You either were a programmer, you were an artist, or you were a sound guy.
Right.
That was the three available jobs. It wasn't even animator, because everything was sprites.
Right.
Everything was so it wasn't like we're animating 3D models. And John and I just happened to be two guys who could program and do art and make something on our own. So we started mocking things up on the screen, and our CEO and general manager we were friendly with them, and they were like, that looks pretty cool. And we were like, let's make a Van Damme game. And there was no Mortal Kombat at the time, so we wanted to make a Van Damme fighting game, and that was kind of like the kind of start of that idea.
Now, was your intent to have Jean-Claude Van Damme be one of the main characters, or the main character?
Yeah. Like we wanted to make Enter the Dragon starring Jean-Claude Van Damme. Like, instead of Bruce Lee, it's Jean-Claude Van Damme, and he would be the main guy, and there would be other characters, but it was his thing. Plus, it was just the name, at the time.
Oh,
like,
Bloodsport was out around
that?
Exactly.
Okay. Bloodsport was like the big thing, and he was like the up-and-coming next Bruce Lee type of action star, Schwarzenegger type of thing. And we just wanted to kind of capitalize on the on his name and the kickboxer thing. And Kickboxer and Bloodsport were all about tournaments, and it was the same kind of thing. It just kind of made for a good match, and so we thought that'd be a cool thing to do.
That's and so I remember when I first saw the game and just being kind of taken aback by the fact that you had digitized the characters, and that you had achieved a level of realism that no other game was achieving by taking a really smart shortcut.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, that was brilliant.
Yeah.
And we were doing sprites as well, but we were going through the effort of trying to build them in 3D and render them, which absolutely at the time didn't come close to reality. Mm-hmm. So that was, and I think that for me, at least as a player, was one of the things that really made it stand out.
Yeah.
But I also loved the characterization that you guys had for the characters. And you did such a good job of separating them by personality wise and with their various abilities. How was it just you two deciding who the characters would be and what would differentiate them?
The main John Tobias and I both contributed into each other's, kind of areas of expertise. But the John was really the one who was coming up with this, and again, there was a lot of it was inspiration from movies and stuff like that. You could look at almost all of our characters, and if you look at, our Johnny Cage character, he's Van Damme in a lot of ways. The Raiden character was inspired by a character in Big Trouble in Little China, electricity guy and stuff like that. Kano had a little bit of, he had this thing that was very much inspired from Terminator. But, John really was the story guy, and he was the guy who, he was the artist. So he drew the costumes and stuff. I was, what do the guys do? This guy throws out the spear and he grabs him. This guy freezes him. And, I was really pushing for the fun kind of over the top supernatural stuff as opposed to, a traditional martial arts. It's like more over the top. And of course, those two things kind of blended together, and there was a lot of overlap. And oh, this guy freezes stuff. Okay, well, I'll give him a story that does this, and we'll write the cool stuff into it. And so, and again, it was until we got the other two guys on the team, it was just two guys. Wouldn't it be cool? Just like two friends would at home. Coming up with an idea. There's no different. It was literally two guys who would come up with something and just happen to have the resources to make it real.
Right.
We got, we were able to do this 8 hours a day. We were able to take a video camera and point it at somebody and go, I bet you we can do this and get away with that. It just happened to work. And a lot of energy, it was both of our first games that were like, okay, we're in charge.
Yeah.
As opposed to like, I had been working with Eugene Jarvis the whole time on all the previous games. And, so it was just right time at the right place, and two guys with a lot of vision of what we wanted to do.
Well, it was a strong vision. I mean,
Yeah.
you can tell, and I think that your example of how you collaborated, even with just two versus a larger team, I mean, that's such a great example of why this industry is special.
Yeah, at the time, and again, this was arcade days when games were like between 5 and 8. The whole team was 5 or 8 people. We were a 4-man team, and most of the successful games were like a marriage of a strong visual person and a strong gameplay person, and a complete like cooperation. It's not like I'm going to do all the visuals, I'm going to do all the gameplay, and we'll make them meet. It was between those two people, in that day. If we can think of something, we could put it on the screen. For the most part, it's not like we need, now it's animators and special effects guys, audio, cinematographers, all this stuff needs to be done to execute one idea. Back then it was, we think of something in the morning and at night it's working, like it was that fast. And that was really, that was the payback that you had, wouldn't it be cool? And then that night it's there was so energizing. There was so much energy that came out of it, and seeing people, the rest of the studio coming in and saying, show me that uppercut, show me that uppercut thing, show me I heard you guys got blood in the game, show me that.
So was that a difficult decision to actually put blood in the game versus no? Because it sounds like you guys from the very beginning wanted to make a more gritty.
Exactly. Yeah.
Approach.
We knew that blood was going to be a big visual tool to get people's attention.
Right.
Like, what is this? And that kind of escalated further to like fatalities and stuff like that. But it didn't even exist at the time. It was just the whole thing. I remember when we got a guy uppercutted and he flew up 10 feet in the air and landed on the ground. That was just like, I must have had 10 people come into my office that day and let me do an uppercut. Let me just do an uppercut like that. And you could tell when everybody's kind of excited about it that we were onto something,
those are those light bulb moments, right? That every project has.
Exactly. Yeah.
That sounds like that's the point where you look at it and you say, okay, we have something magic.
Yeah.
Let's now just build on it.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. And again, we were, again, we were like in our 20s and stuff. So it was very, there was no like, I guess we were too naive to be nervous about it or something. It was just like, this is really cool. Let's keep doing that.
Right.
It was just scratching that itch of, isn't this cool? Let's keep building on it. So.
Well, speaking of continuing to build on it, once you had success with the first game, what was did you guys look at each other, your team, and go, okay, what's next? Did you actually decide, did you consider doing something else, or did you know right away that you just wanted to go into a sequel? No. Okay.
No. I remember we were doing like an interview for this local Chicago TV station about the first Mortal Kombat game, and then we just finished the interview, and our general manager comes out, and we wanted to do Star Wars. We were absolutely, our next game's going to be a Star Wars game, And our general manager, we didn't get quite as much, you know, information about sales and stuff like that. But like the game like broke like every arcade record and stuff like that. And our general manager was like, well, I'm just can we talk with the Lucas people about the Star Wars thing? And we were genuinely wide-eyed, can we do this? And I remember him, our general manager, saying, he goes, Star Wars, you're not doing Star Wars. And it was as so like, you foolish kids, like you're not doing Star Wars, you're doing Mortal Kombat 2, and it was, there was no negotiation. And I remember, us going, two, a second one, it wasn't like kind of, there was back then, it wasn't as much of an assumption that you do a sequel when you do something successful.
Right.
But I remember it, when I look back at it now, thinking, how did we not think that, we were going to do another one? But I think we were just so excited about Star Wars and doing something like that's how that came about. We were told we're doing Mortal Kombat 2.
Yeah. So and Mortal Kombat has had a lot of sequels.
Yeah.
So with the sequels that you've done, have there been certain approaches that you've taken at the beginning of each sequel to ensure that you're pushing it forward? Or
in general, like philosophically, it's interesting. With each one, I think we always thought to ourselves, how do we answer the question, what's different about this one than the last one?
Right.
It's not just the same game with a prettier skin on it or stuff like that. And so, like the first 3 Mortal Kombat games were sprite games. We were still in kind of sprite world, and the PlayStation had come out, and I remember, the PlayStation 1 was like a perfect port of Mortal Kombat 3. Like it was like absolutely spot on. I think they made an emulator or something of the arcade stuff, but they got it spot on. And I remember like after Mortal Kombat 3, we were kind of feeling, to do another game with sprites, and like I think Tekken or something might have come out at the time, and that was
Tekken
like a 3D
was
game.
Tekken and Tobal, I think, were the two.
Yeah, or like Battle Arena Toshinden or
that sounds right.
Yeah. There was so I remember us kind of going, wow, 3D is kind of like the way to go, and so like Mortal Kombat 4, we had introduced 3D, but we were so afraid of diving into that we kept the 2D play mechanic of it. And so we in my opinion, we kind of wedged in, like it was almost like a compromise of the two. And but at the same time, we were like, we introduced weapons and we did this. We always wanted to add something that the previous game didn't have to like kind of answer the question, why should I care about this version? Why should I care about that version? And that's always been the kind of I guess the philosophy that we took of, how do we answer the question, what's new about this one that hasn't been in the previous ones?
So we face the same challenge too with a lot of the games that we make. And one thing that I wish we had the time to do, and the inclination once we started the sequels, go back and ask people, did that sequel that we just released satisfy what you were looking for?
Yeah.
Did you guys get a chance to say observe players who were playing your previous release and say, we thought people would like this, but they like something else?
Not until like, years later, like into the PS2 days, in for the first 4 games, I think we did the arcade game and somebody else did the port. Acclaim did all the ports of the first 2 games. Midway published the home versions, but another team would do the ports because we were working on the next one. And we were on such a treadmill of when's the next game? There was very little, if no time, to kind of like sit back and even almost ask ourselves what didn't work, what did work, let alone actually, get a group of players or some kind of thing. And there was no like
Oh, usability labs back then.
Yeah, and the internet was just kind of, it was more like news groups and stuff like that. There weren't services like there are now and stuff like that.
Right.
So we didn't have as much of a thing. Now we get, we have access to that kind of stuff, but at the time it was just winging it and, reading what people would say. They like this feature, they don't like this feature, and you kind of get an idea of what they're liking in the game.
Did you ever go to an arcade incognito and just sit back and watch people?
That's all we did.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Yeah. When we first started testing the game, it was funny because, again, we were, in our 20s, we could blend in.
Yeah.
Like a lot of the players were our age, and just as the years went by, you're kind of like, we're kind of like the older person sitting in the arcade. It's like borderline creepy, then, fortunately or unfortunately, around the second or third game, we had done, interviews and stuff. And so people would start recognizing us, or they would realize that, this thing of like, oh, this arcade is a midway test location. They bring their games out before the game is done. And they would see me or somebody coming in with a circuit board. The cabinet's been sitting there for a week. And then, oh, they're testing, and then here's the new Mortal Kombat 2 game. And so everybody would kind of, that anonymity thing where you can blend into the background kind of went away.
Yeah.
And so, you'd have to kind of juggle, like, somebody's, asking you questions and they're real excited. And you're like, I'm kind of watching the game on test, can we talk later and stuff like that. And so that, the arcade thing was so attached to the public that it became harder to be to observe the game without, like, interacting with people all the time.
So I imagine you also watch people playing other games. And
oh yeah.
So
absolutely.
what was your team's favorite competitor, or what has been your team's favorite competitor? Given that you guys have been making Mortal Kombat forever.
I don't know if I can answer for the entire team, but I was always a big fan of Street Fighter and Tekken. Those were the two games that, like, if I were to choose from all the fighting games which one I'd want to play, there are a lot of great ones out there, but the Street Fighter and Tekken, and I don't know if there's there's a little bit of, because they've been around long too, and stuff like that, and Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat, and Tekken have kind of gone through, many generations of, arcade, home, PS1, PS2, PS3, PS, and had versions represented in that. And plus, I just like the gameplay and feel. Those two games feel very different. But, so I would say those two for me.
What do those games do that you think is sort of their special sauce?
For Tekken, I feel is probably one of the best games for, like, jockeying around and kind of they call it footsies in the fighting game vernacular of kind of tempting your opponent and kind of going in and playing mind games and whatnot. I think they do that great. They're not very aerial. They're very much, it's much more hand to hand, much more, I don't know if you can call it like it's closer to reality,
right, than
a Street Fighter or Mortal Kombat. Street Fighter gets in, they get into fireballs and, impossible things and stuff like that. And Mortal Kombat is like even more so, teleporting all over the place and doing crazy stuff. But so Tekken, I think kind of the jockeying and the footsies are kind of really a great feeling mechanic. Street Fighter has probably the best kind of strategy, like fireballs, jumping over them, and again the mind games of using your special moves and stuff like that. So there are certain those two things. I think. Very strong, very admire them.
Well, given that you and your team are expert designers when it comes to fighting games, how today do the fans notice just the tiny tweaks that you guys are making every single time you release a game? Do they contact you and say, why did you change
The maniacs do.
The maniacs do.
The
Okay.
maniacs do. There's always, and I say maniacs, affectionately.
Yeah.
Like those are our biggest evangelists. Those are our biggest, cheerleaders and our biggest critics.
Sure.
So you take both. You don't take just one. And some people dissect your game to a level that you wouldn't even dissect. I mean, they play the game more hours than I have in my day.
Sure.
So they will, but that's part of they love the game. They absolutely do that. There's they used to call them FAQs, where they would break down the latest patch, the latest revs, and how now it makes these two characters go down in the tier list and stuff. And it's an interesting, entertaining, and sometimes frustrating science to be involved in.
Well, the last question I'll ask on this topic, are there some sacred cows for you guys in terms of timings of certain moves or distance that you allow the characters to get be away from each other, or just things that you might or might not do in the game that you believe would break that trust with the fans?
Yes and no. Not from the standpoint of like any of the designers, like what move they want to try. There's nothing holding. We don't say you can't do this. You got to stay within this box. But once it's put into the game, and if it's an exploit that is just ridiculously unfair, our QA people are like, look, you can't touch me. Look, keep trying to like that weeds out the egregious examples of just unfair moves, imbalance, and things like that. But we don't like to ask the designers to stay too constricted, because at the end of the day, we've made we just finished Mortal Kombat 10, and you gotta and to say, okay, come up with another design for Scorpion, you don't want to put a box inside of that just because it's so hard not to repeat yourself and not to do that. So
well, that's great that you encourage that creative freedom.
Yeah,
that seems really important to keep the team motivated and allow the franchise to evolve.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, speaking of evolution, I also remember way back the Mortal Kombat movie and seeing it and thinking to myself, wow, this is a video game movie done right. I really enjoyed that first one.
Yeah.
And so with that brush with Hollywood, how would you describe the difference between, say, Hollywood and our industry? And I ask this because I have a certain opinion. I know that a lot of people looking at the movie industry from the outside do, but you've been sort of involved in both sides.
Yeah. I suspect that you've had much more experience than I have working with them, more overlap. At the time that the first Mortal Kombat movie was made, we were working on Mortal Kombat 3. We were still in Sprite Land. We were still on the sprint of a treadmill of next game, and so there was very little that we very little time that we had to like we didn't write the story or whatever. It was based on our story.
Yeah.
But there was a significant difference from what they originally pitched for Mortal Kombat. Like there was like does Kano really have to have that eye thing? Can he just wear a pirate patch? And we're like, no, absolutely no. And they wanted Danny Glover to be Raiden, and they wanted, like it was just like it was a little bit more of servicing, things that were outside of the interest of the original movie. And but at the end of the day, we were so excited. We came out here to LA, and we saw the sets. And we were just completely enamored with, my God, there's a guy dressed up like Scorpion, and he has this spear thing, and there was the novelty of that was, and it just seemed so big in scale and scope and importance, and it was a video game movie. And again, we didn't have as many back then. That was
right.
Like
I think we still don't have that many. I mean, it's rare.
Exactly. And so we there was no way we could kind of get into the critiquing things. Like it was just like, oh, cool, this is the coolest thing in the world. They're making a video game, and and wow, that's what craft services is. Like just learning all of these movie terms and stuff like that. So I don't feel like we've had much. We didn't. There wasn't much overlap with that. We were very, again, young and kind of naive.
But your voice in the movie?
It is. It was funny when I was one of the times I was out here. The producers said, we really want to use your voice to be in the movie, and apparently, like, I wasn't a member of SAG at the time, so they got this expedited thing. They drove me over to this one place. I signed this thing, whatever. And then I was officially a member of SAG, and then I got into the mic. I said, get over here or come here, and a couple other lines. And to this day, every once in a while, I get a check for the Mortal Kombat movie for my participation as Scorpion.
That is fantastic.
Really, yeah. 30 years later, 25 years later, whatever it was.
Damn. Well, do random people come up to you and say, "Can you please get over here"?
Yeah. Well, usually at like at E3 or Comic-Con or something like that, where more video game educated people are, they'll recognize me or something like that. But it's not like in the middle of the street or something. Occasionally somebody will say it, but the get over here thing is I usually say no, just because then they'll say, do it again and do it to my camera and say it to my girlfriend and stuff like that. And so it's so I just try to kind of develop the policy of like, oh no, it hurts my throat, man.
It is a very distinctive phrase.
It is. It's really weird. I see it referenced every once in a while on like a sitcom or something or something like that. I remember Jimmy Fallon and Justin Bieber were doing this handshake thing. It was like this skit, and this is about 2 years ago, pretty recently. And they were doing all these pop culture references, and Jimmy Fallon or Justin Bieber says, Hadouken, and then Jimmy Fallon goes, get over here, and and they assumed that people knew what it was talking about, and I was like, wow, that's really cool. That's
I think if you grew up in the last
90s
and 80s 2000s, you knew, or 90s basically.
Yeah,
I know, I can hear it in my head. Because I heard it so much.
Yeah.
So, and I'm not going to ask you to repeat it here. So, but that's great.
Yeah. That's fun.
You have become a part of pop culture, not just for the games, but for that phrase.
Yeah. I have a button on my desk, one of those, buttons that, plays a sound. For one of the events years ago, there was, and it says, yells, get over here on it there. So when people ask in my office.
I love it. Well, so moving on to sort of where you are now, you lead a large team at NetherRealm, and you have a lot of responsibilities when it comes to making sure the studio's running smoothly, right? And making sure the games are coming out on time and that they're continuing to push the envelope for what you guys do. How do you balance everything?
Very difficult. It's very difficult. As you know, games are such a gigantic piece of art to put together, involving so many different disciplines and artists and experts in so many fields that it's like steering a giant cruise ship or something like that. And there are I haven't written code in I don't know how many years. So it's just a very different process. You really have to trust others, to do their job, and try to provide some, guidance for the whole game being consistent and following the same kind of overall vision and stuff like that. But I personally don't do as much, of the, in the trenches, designing, writing any code or script like that. And it's more so at a higher level of, is our overall game, accessible, approachable? Does it hit these beats? Does it, so it's I guess it's kind of like directing a movie in some respects of just making sure that the entire package is, stays moving towards the original kind of goal that we intended.
I think that's absolutely essential, right?
Yeah,
You have to have a creative leader who is where the buck stops.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. At the end of the day, somebody needs to make the call on a lot of stuff, but one person can't, certainly can't make every single decision. Several years ago, you had given a talk at DICE about the whole thing of like I did this and I did this and I did that and I had my fingers in all this and then the game turned out great and we're awesome and I've run into similar things like that where you really and again it's just as the team grows. Our team went from 4 to 200 or whatever it is over the course of 20 plus years, and it's just a different science. And then so as you reach passing the 100 mark or the 120 mark, realizing that you cannot, it's just impossible to make every decision.
Mm-hmm.
And it also, even if you do, it doesn't turn out as good as if you
delegated that creative authority.
Exactly. Yeah. And that I kind of learned that lesson over time of like relinquishing some decision making to really guys who are better at that part of the game than I am.
Was there any incident or time in particular that helped bring that into focus for you?
Usually it's discussions with the team after we're done with the game.
Okay.
What could have worked better for you? What could have worked, what can we do better the next time and stuff like that. And, I found myself as, the bottleneck to things because, and I mean, to this day, it's still something that I like to think I'm improving on all the time, but, not having me be the bottleneck of a decision for everything, because there's just not enough hours in a day to okay like that, and just kind of taking a step back and letting others do what they do, like I said, better than I do.
Sure.
Doing their job.
So it sounds like you have a very strong rapport with the team, and you guys talk openly about things. And so, I want to ask for you to provide some advice for any other creative leaders who are listening. What is your best? What's your advice for eliciting honest feedback from the team?
My thing is, if you can encourage, even to the point of brutal honesty, if you can encourage that, get the response, and then don't react right away to it, because like there's a tendency of to defend it, like saying, well, you were too involved in this or something like that. It's like, well, I had to because this and that. So I was right, like, and just kind of like saying, sit on it for a little while, sit on the thing, like, and even compile all of your areas that things can be improved, and then like give it time so like the emotional variable is kind of lessened. I think that will give a good insight, and also to have other people involved in it. We have other directors in the studio, and in various disciplines, and we're all kind of self critiquing each other, and like I said, it's at first it's kind of a bitter pill to swallow, but then at the end of the day, it's like, okay, let's fix it, because it's too many people involved, too many well-paid professionals that you're not getting the best out of if you don't let them do their thing. So
that's great advice, and I hope folks listening take advantage of that.
Yeah.
So on the other end, there are, I'm sure, a lot of people who are listening and saying, wow, I the way you got into the industry is so cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
How does one do that today? And given that you run a studio and you work with lots of people who are coming into the industry, what would be your advice to somebody who is looking at your games and has the desire to be a programmer, an artist, a designer, a sound engineer on a game of that caliber?
Well, some people have asked me, like, well, how do I get to do your job? Like your job. And my path started, 25, 30 years ago. And I don't know if that path necessarily exists now. What's great though about now is, I always say, what's your favorite discipline? Is it art, animation, 3D modeling, music composition, design, programming, there are so many fields of contribution into games. And I said, get to be the best at, one field. If you're in animation, be the best animator on the team. If you're your 3D modeler, be the best 3D modeler on the team, or the best 3D modeler that you can be. And usually when somebody reaches that level, there's like this organic nature of, oh, you're really good at that. We're going to give you more to do. We're going to give you more to do. And the guys who embrace, taking on more and growing and expanding their things just come to them naturally. Other people on the team are just go to you for asking, oh, this, and then why don't you be the lead? Why don't you be this? And then you're the director of this. And my experience is the people who've gotten to the point of being a director or a lead or a project lead or something were the guys who were the most like optimistic and how do we solve the problem as opposed to how do I complain about the problem. And those are the guys who people just naturally go to for answers, for a positive, response. And it's a difficult thing to kind of articulate, but I really believe that those are the people that people just gravitate to.
Yeah.
And they naturally become, a lot of guys that that lead teams now were, an animator on a game, and now they are the project lead. They were, a QA person, and now they are, running a studio. Like I literally know guys who started as in QA and they run a studio now. Like it's that much of a that high of a ladder to climb. So that would be my
I think that's a wonderful comment on our industry in general.
Yeah.
The fact that as long as you have those traits that you just described, you can go anywhere.
Exactly. Yeah. And it will be noticed. You consistently do a great job, and people will know about it on the team.
Well, I want to just, if you're comfortable sharing it, I'd love for people to know what your Twitter handle is. Can people follow you?
Sure.
How can people
My
learn
Twitter
more about
handle
you?
is the word Ed Boon backwards.
Okay.
NoobD, NoobDE, at NoobD. That's my Twitter handle. I'm not on Instagram or anything like that. But and I try to attend DICE and GDC and E3 and all the kind of industry things, and doing stuff like this is great just because it's like you don't often get like a platform to kind of have a conversation like this, and it's just great opportunity.
Well, and last thing I want to say is because we didn't talk about Injustice, but my kids are so into Injustice too.
Oh, cool.
They've
That's
been
awesome.
Injustice fans, but now I've got 4 kids, and they all love to play against each other, girls and boys. So
wow,
it is
great to hear, man.
And it's fun for me as well,
yeah.
just to play with them. So you've been bringing joy to our household. So I personally appreciate it.
Yeah, well, there's 200 people in Chicago who really appreciate that comment.
Right on.
Yeah.
Well, Ed, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us for the Game Maker's Notebook. For more information on the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences, our podcasts, and our other initiatives, please visit www.interactive.org.